Parshas Vayeshev, the very last verse of this week's Parsha. It's in Perek Mem, Pasuk Chav Gimel. That's 40:23 in Genesis. It says as follows: V'lo zachar sar hamashkim es Yosef vayishkachehu. The wine pourer or the minister of drink for Paro did not remember Yosef, and he forgot him. Well, we can start off right away by saying, what is the difference? If you don't remember, then of course you've forgotten. So there are those who say, Rashi says, V'lo zachar sar hamashkim bo bayom. That day he didn't remember him. Vayishkachehu lachar mikan. And vayishkachehu meaning he forgot him as a result or afterwards. The Chizkuni and others say that lo zachar es Yosef, he didn't mention him. He didn't use his power of speech, lahazkir, to mention. Lo zachar es Yosef vayishkachehu. We see a similar distinction at the end of Parshas Cited, which talks about the obligation to remember that which Amalek did to us, to the children of Israel, as we left Egypt. And it says, Zochor es asher aseh lecha Amalek, remember that which Amalek did to you. And at the end it says, Lo tishkach, you should not forget. And the question, again, is, well, if you don't remember, you're going to forget. So it seems to be superfluous phrasing. And there, the Gemara says, well, you might think that if one is Zachor, means you have to remember in contrast to forget. But it says Zachor b'feh, remember it by mouth. Say something. Why say something? So the Malbim says that the distinction between Zechira and, which is, we're translating as memory, remembering, and Shikha, forgetting, not that Shikha is simply an absence of Zechira, but to remember, to be Zocher, means to bring it to your attention, means to commit it to memory, to take note. And sometimes you have to do something to take note. Sometimes you can't just listen, but you need to say it in order to remember it. Or you need literally to take notes, or to tie a ribbon around your finger, or to write something down and to keep it in your pocket, or to set an alarm. Something to remember, to remind, to cause you to keep it in your mind. Shikha, on the other hand, is the state of not having that memory, simply not having it, to be shocheach. So when the Torah says, Lo zachar sar hamashkim es Yosef, according to the Malbim, it means that the sar hamashkim, Paro's sommelier, if you will, did not take steps to remember. Now, the Medrash actually says that he took many steps to remember, but the Almighty caused him to forget. This is not evident in the verse itself, but it does come into play with a secondary aspect of this verse. So we have lo zachar and shachach. Sometimes to remember things, maybe always, you have to do something to commit them to memory. You have to pay attention. How many times have we heard somebody ask us to do something, and we actually did hear it, but it didn't register, it didn't get locked in. The Gemara frequently says, simonach, it says that there's a simon and it'll give a bunch of letters like Yal Kagam or Yak Nahaz. It will tell you various devices for remembering. I have members of the family who are significant Talmidei Chachamim who studied works on memory, practical works for how to remember things. And there's a difference between reading something for pleasure and reading something to remember. Anybody who's had to cram for a test knows this, or to prepare for a video board knows this, that there's a different type of learning. As a matter of fact, a corollary to this is what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav, says that one of the 48 ways to wisdom is lomed almanas lelamed, learning in order to teach. That pressure of teaching increases the learning. Now, it can increase it for a number of reasons. Number one is you better understand it if you think you're going to explain it to somebody. But there's also a sense that you feel the pressure to commit something to memory. And when you do, when you take the steps to commit it to memory, to say it over, to pace back and forth, and to say the words out loud, or when somebody is davening, when they're praying, to say the words clearly and slowly so that you can hardwire them into your memory, that is a device that you can use to remember. Now, the question here is, why does this verse appear at all? In other words, this follows Yosef's successful interpretation of the Saramashkim's dream. And he says, please, when you get out, remember me to Paro, and he'll take me out. And he'll take me out of prison. He'll release me from prison. This is, Yosef is sitting in prison here, and he's interpreting dreams. He tells the cupbearer that he will be saved, and he tells the baker that he'll be hanged. So the very next verse, which begins the next parsha, which is Miketz, is Vahi Miketz Shnasayim Yamim, and it was 2 years later. Now, the meaning of the narrative of the story could have been carried out without any deficit in the flow of the story had it just said, V'sar ha'ofim talak asher pasar lahem Yosef, and the baker was hanged as Yosef had predicted. And Yosef had already asked the Saramashkim to remember him to Yosef, and then it could have said, Vahi Miketz Shnasayim Yamim, and then 2 years later, the episode happened, and the Saramashkim reminded Paro. Why this intervening step? Why this verse that says the Saramashkim didn't remember? He ultimately did remember. So why do we need this? So there are many interpretations, but the majority, at least as far as I can tell, interpretation is that Yosef was punished for having put his faith in the Saramashkim, and so he was forced, or he was caused to stay for another 2 years in prison. And it's puzzling. It's very puzzling. Because what was Yosef supposed to do? Now, there are those who say that because he was a righteous person on such a high level, that he should have had, and he had his dreams that said he was destined for glory and for leadership of the Jews. He could have waited, and he could have waited for the redemption, and that does happen to people. But instead, he made the attempt on his own. But there are those who say, in Somcham al Nes, you can't rely on a miracle. And we see, for example, that the Avos did not rely on miracles. They said when they were going with their wives, whether it was with Sarah or with Rivka, it's say that you're my sister so that no harm will befall me. Well, why don't you just rely on God? And we see that Yaakov does all manner of things in order to best Lavan and to prevail over Esav, and he prepares for war, and he prays, and he gives him presents. So we see that there is this notion of hishtadlus. So the meforshim, the hishtadlus, meaning to attempt through natural means to achieve the end that the Almighty could deliver, and the Almighty may well deliver through your natural means. The Rabeinu Avraham ben HaRambam, and also, if my memory serves me correctly, ironically, I looked this up in the Ateres Mordechai that I have here, Sefer by Mordechai Rogow. I recall seeing it in the Sefer. I didn't find it here. That actually this was not a punishment. They're in the minority, but Rabeinu Avraham ben HaRambam, the son of Maimonides, he cites those examples that I quoted about the Avos, about the forefathers, and he says that Yosef actually was rewarded, and he was rewarded with perfect timing. Now, imagine, he doesn't get into detail, and Rabbi Rogow does a little bit, but here's the scenario. Imagine had the Sar Hamashkim said immediately to Paro, there's this guy, he's really good, he got me out of here, let him go. And imagine possibly that Paro would have listened to him and let Yosef go. What would have happened? Yosef, in essence, would have been, now we don't know, we can't predict the future, but he would have been a freed prisoner, a felon on the streets of Egypt. Now what? But instead, waiting 2 years, he gets spirited, next week's Parsha, spirited out of his captivity, cleaned up, brought before the king, delivers words that were well received, astonishingly well received, so much so that the king appoints him as the second in command, all because of timing. And that timing would not have been there had Yosef gotten out what is in essence, what we know now, is prematurely. So the Torah actually adds these words to tell you that Yosef did rely, according to this reading, appropriately on the aid of people around him, but it didn't happen right away. It didn't happen as perhaps he had wanted or planned, because there were greater things in store for him. And this is sometimes a lesson for us. We think that we know the best way to accomplish something, and it may in fact be the best way to accomplish it, but it won't necessarily play out the way we wanted it to or we expected it to. It might play out even better. Have a good Shabbos.